Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my second short story in my short story project. This year I've decided to read a short story every month and make a video in which I discuss that short story. Except for this month, since it's Black History Month, I decided to do two stories by two African American authors, one by Zora Neal Hurston called Sweat, which I'm going to be talking about today, and the other, Red-Headed Baby, by Langston Hughes, which I'll make a video of and post on the 28th. This story by Zora Neal Ht is a story I liked a lot. I thought it was very powerful and moving and effective, and I thought it was a great example of Zora Neal Hurston's feminist approach to writing and her ability to capture aspects of the African American community. I will say that, as was also true, which was also true in Their Eyes Are Watching God, African American men don't come off particularly well in this story, and they don't come off particularly well in that novel. The story is really simple. It's obviously set in the South sometime, before the 1930s in an African American community. Hurston herself grew up in an all African American community, and this appears to be the case here. There don't appear to be any white people living in that community, and it essentially revolves around two characters who are married. Delia, who is a washerwoman who does washing for either people in her community or perhaps white people who never actually appear in the book. She's a washerwoman. She does washing at home, and so we see her working hard and sweating, as the name would suggest, to wash these clothes to make money, and that money has paid for the small home that she and Sykes live in, because Sykes is a wastrel and a cad and a adulterer, and he beats Delia, and he is psychologically abusive and verbally abusive to Delia. In other words, he's the worst kind of husband imaginable, and whatever money Sykes makes, he gambles away or he spends on his mistress, because we learn quickly in this story that Sykes is cheating on Delia. He claims it's because she's too skinny, which, since she's essentially working herself really hard 6 days, 6.5 days a week, it's not that surprising, but he says she's too skinny, and so his mistress is a heavier woman. Everybody in their community knows that Sykes is cheating on Delia. This is humiliation, which he at first just tries to ignore, but eventually Sykes' mistress becomes so bold that she actually comes to the house that Delia and Sykes share, looking for Sykes. Sykes beats Delia. We learn that relatively quickly, and we also begin to see very quickly in the story that Delia stands up to Sykes physically, that when he threatens to hit her, she picks up, I believe, a frying pan and threatens him with it. If he comes near her, she's going to hit him with it and kill her. And this may be one of the few times in Sykes' life somebody has stood up to him, and he's really confused by it. He's confused by this new Delia who's willing to commit violence against him and to prevent him from committing acts of violence against her. And so he at least temporarily backs down and doesn't go through with his threat to beat her. Apparently the men in this community are aware of everything that's going on between Sykes and Delia. There's a scene set at a country store where the African American men in this community are sitting around the porch talking to one another, and the topic of Delia and Sykes comes up. And they discuss how awful it is that the beautiful young woman that Delia has become this woman who has to work herself essentially to death all this time, and how awful it is that Sykes humiliates her by cheating on her with a woman that they don't think is as good as Delia, and how he beats her, and how that's changed her looks and her demeanor. And they even briefly talk about taking some action against Sykes to stand up for Delia. But about the time they're talking about that, Sykes shows up, and it becomes clear that these men are intimidated by Sykes, and despite what they might be saying, they're going to do nothing to help Delia. The action of the story picks up tremendously when Sykes, who knows Delia is deathly afraid of snakes, brings home a large rattlesnake in a box and puts it in the house. This terrifies Delia. She has an incredible fear of snakes, and for a while she can't stand to be in the house with the snake at all. It's possible that Sykes is using the snake to try to drive Delia out of the house. I think that's what he's doing. But Delia is tough and resilient, and she refuses to give up that easily. Sykes apparently lets the snake out of the box, or the snake gets out of the box, And Delia, unsuspectingly, finds the snake in the laundry hamper on a Sunday when she's going to do the laundry. And she narrowly escapes without being bitten by the snake. And she runs screaming from the house. She jumps up and runs and goes and spends the rest of that evening in the barn in terror of this snake that's in her house. And her house is incredibly important to her. For her, it is this kind of perfect place that she's created, that she has paid for with her own money and her own sweat and her own work. And so, the snake in her house is a real threat to that, and I think that's no doubt that Sykes has done this on purpose. Sykes comes home. Delia's sleeping in the barn. She hears him come home after a night with his mistress. She hears him come home, and he goes into the house. She doesn't warn him that the snake is out. Instead, she goes to listen at the bedroom window to see what happens, and what she hears is Sykes in a confrontation with the snake, and it becomes evident that the snake bites Sykes at least once. And while she still can't bring herself to go into the house, she does run to the door to find Sykes swollen and dying from the snake venom crawling towards her. One of his eyes is swollen shut, but he sees her with the other eye, and he says her name, and he calls to her, and she doesn't attempt to give him any help. She knows that the actual help he needs is too far away anyway, but she doesn't extend any comfort to him. Instead, she goes and stands in the yard under a tree that she's planted, and essentially just lets him die. She lets him die knowing that he knows that she knows he's dying, and that she's done nothing. And that's pretty much the story. And I just think it's a brilliant story, well told. I think it conveys the point that Hurston intends about the trouble that African American women are faced in the African American community. It carries that feminist message with it. I also suspect that there's a fair amount of a biblical symbolism here, which you've no doubt probably picked up on. For instance, I think Delia thinks of her house kind of as an Eden, as a perfect place, a place she, I think, refers to it as a lovely, lovely place that she's created. I think that she and Sykes in some ways represent an incredibly dysfunctional Adam and Eve. The snake obviously enters into that Eden and changes everything, and essentially, contact with that snake, at least temporarily, drives them both out, kills Sykes, and we don't know if Delia goes back to the house or not. It drives her out. There's biblical language at one point where when Delia is kind of dealing with the reality that Sykes is cheating on her, and he's humiliated her, and he's doing all these things. She talks about, or she imagines herself crawling from the Garden of Gethsemane to the rocky hill of Calvary, suggesting that, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus essentially asked God to let the burden of dying for man's sins pass him over. And then she crawls to Calvary as though she is going to be that sacrifice. But she's not. And instead, Sykes dies for his own sins. It's his own fault for bringing the snake into the house. It's his own fault for introducing that into their Eden. It's his own fault for ruining their marriage and, ruining her. If you read the story, if you have thoughts about the story, please share them with me and let me know what you thought about the perhaps biblical symbolism and what you thought about the ending of the story and what it meant. Does Delia go back to the house? Does she go on? What do you think happens to her? Or how does the community react to Sykes' death? These are all things that are left unsaid, I think, and create a certain amount of curiosity. And so I'll be interested to see what you know, or what you think. Sorry, not what you know, what you think about the end of the story. Anyway, like I said, leave those comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.